Hey, it's Soul with another video brought to you by Jesse D, and the reason why is because I'm going to be reading from their blog. So, let me just get right to it. Let me start by making one thing really clear. I am a gold maker. That is how I choose to enjoy the game, just like others choose to be raiders, PvPers, or Mythic Plus Dungeoneers. Blizzard would never make access to Mythic raids require a ton of PvP currency, imagine the outrage if they did, and yet they seem to think it is perfectly fine to make the rank 2 and 3 recipes for the majority of BOE, that is sellable crafted gear, require marks of honor. I hate PvP. I'm not good at it, I don't enjoy it, and waiting sometimes half an hour in a battleground queue, only to be steamrolled by the other team that is complete with 3 healers while you have only 1 and are also 2 members short of a full team, can be rather rage-inducing. To go through all of that and get no reward, thus making no progress toward that next recipe rank, is infuriating, especially when you don't want to be playing PvP in the first place. It seems though we may be expected to do it all over again in 8.1. Looking at the PTR, it appears that Blizzard intends for the new crafted BOE gear, Sinister Combatants, to require marks of honor for the rank 2s and 3s again. Now I know, it's the PTR, it could change, but the fact that the gear is called Sinister Combatants and the recipes are on the same vendor as the Honorable Combatants recipes does suggest that Blizzard intends to once again force us gold makers to grind our faces against content that has nothing to do with gold making. Jesse D's post continues on for a little bit longer, stating that they may very well quit the game unless there is some sort of major change that goes on. But let me just sum things up that the concern is there are certain recipe ranks, not recipes themselves, but the ranks, the 2s and 3s that are locked behind marks of honor that require PvP in order to complete. This is something that I found to be a very fascinating subject to talk about because this involves professions, which is something that I do wholeheartedly, and gold making, and kind of the clash of principles. That's what I'll call it. A clash of principles that has created this sort of conversation as to whether or not these certain recipe ranks should be locked behind this kind of game system, as in PvP. Let me give a little bit of disclosure as well. Jesse D is a patron of this channel. Despite that though, I believe that we have, well, conflicting principles. If you didn't know already, I too am a gold maker, although a very low-end type. I'm considered small potatoes. I make like about, I don't know, 500 to $1 million a month, something like that profit, but you know, whatever, that's beside the point. The point is, yeah, I make gold, and so I feel that I have a bit of perspective to add to this conversation. The principal thought that I am interpreting from this blog post from Jesse D is that as a gold maker, we should have access to all these recipes that let us make gold and make tons of profits and all that stuff. I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. There are numerous recipes that are just locked behind just getting yourself up to the trainer's face and, you know, buy all the recipes and like you're done. Where things start to diverge though are all the recipes that are outside of that scope, that are outside of that profession vendor, because from there, where do you go? You need to go to a reputation vendor. You need to go to, in this case, for the purpose of this conversation, a PvP vendor. Sometimes these recipes or rank recipes drop from a dungeon or a raid even. So in order to go further with this conversation and talk about the principle of being able to access all these recipes, we can't just talk about PvP recipe ranks, we have to talk about everything that's locked behind everything else aside from simply buying those recipes with gold. And I have to ask myself, is this fair? Like I said, I'm a gold maker. I make glyphs. That's all I do. I make glyphs, I roll the mouse, and I collect money. In order to get certain glyphs, though, in this case, some of the glyphs that I had to get from Battle for Azeroth, I had to, I believe, farm a rare. I needed to get my reputation with the Tortolan up to revered. I needed to max out my inscription, which is not very, you know, that's kind of part of the process too. But there were certain hoops that I had to go around in order to obtain these recipes that might involve things that I don't feel like doing, like leveling. I know that's a very silly hill to die on, but I'm just using that as one example of content that people may not feel like doing for the sake of accessing something that they really want. In order to come to even a semblance of understanding, we'll have to kind of use our imagination and inject a little bit of roleplay into the idea of these professions and not just consider ourselves as a gold maker, but just as a citizen of Azeroth. What is it that it takes in order to access these kinds of recipes? Going back to the context of this blog post, it summarizes into the idea that you need to get marks of honor in order to obtain the rank 2s and 3s of these PvP-esque recipes. And this is worth money. Being able to make this kind of gear will most definitely generate gold, as it has in the beginning of this expansion and every other expansion before that. If we inject a little bit of roleplay in this, in order to get the basic recipe, just to make it itself, we only need to go to a vendor. That's it. Buy the recipes, you're done. In order to get those rank 2s and 3s, well, what is it that allows us to learn something like that? Using a roleplay perspective, there are two ways that Blizzard could have granted us these extra ranks. One would be similar to making the kind of mythic gear that we can make in this expansion right now, where if you create one, then you automatically learn a new recipe that lets you make the upgraded version, or I guess going back to this case, being able to make it with reduced materials. That would be a fair way to go about it, and whether you want to see this as just a design decision or something arbitrary or something that, to make you prolong your subscription or something like that, Blizzard decided to go a different route and instead put this behind understandably a PvP vendor. In order for your character as a crafting specialist, in order for them to create this better PvP stuff, then they would naturally learn the technique from someone, an NPC in this case, who is versed or who is experienced with PvP combat. I see this not really different from an alchemist or a scribe not being able to have access to certain recipes or recipe ranks because they don't happen to be able to raid. They don't happen to be able to get the recipes that'll get them the rank 2 cauldrons or whatnot. In other words, the way I see these recipe rank restrictions, it's more like a soft specialization more than, hey, we're totally locked out of this content and it's not fair. Once upon a time there was, or actually, I think there still is, Goblin and Gnomish engineering. You learn one, you're not able to access the recipes of the other. And between each specialization, there are certain things that you can and cannot get. These days, it's more of a soft specialization where you can in fact learn everything that there is to learn. It's just that you've got to put the effort into completing that certain kind of content in order to get access to it. Also, and this might turn off a number of people or even offend folks like Jesse D. As a gold maker, one advantage that you have is that you have tremendous capital and resources. The way I see it, it's not a matter of not having access to these recipes. I consider that more of an obstacle rather than a showstopper, because you can simply leverage someone else that does have access to these recipes, give them a little bit of a tip, have them craft all this stuff for you, give it back to you, and then you can resell it at whatever value. What this results in is perhaps slightly higher prices that you may charge in this case, but you'd still, at least I would wager that you would still be profitable in that sense. The only thing is that you'd have to put in the extra work of leveraging someone who has access to recipes that you do not. And that's part of how the player economy works, being able to get things that you otherwise couldn't get yourself. That's why people are buying gear from you and you and you and you in the first place, because they either don't have the time or they don't have the experience or the know-how to acquire this stuff, but they see something on the auction house or in trade chat, they're like, yeah, I'm gonna pick that up. So to sum up my thoughts here, I am okay with this kind of approach, with having these rank 2s and 3s being locked behind something that is specialized, because that helps to celebrate the differentiation between crafters. Certain crafters that are PvP oriented, yes, they have access to everything, while others have access to all these other recipes that are behind a reputation or a raid. Anything that you don't have access to is just a matter of overcoming that weakness by getting in touch with someone that does have that access and working together, and so that both of you can profit. I get that there are people who disagree with me on that principle, so I would love to have a conversation with you down in a comment below. Of course, if you enjoyed this talk and listen, please like the video and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.